So hello, everyone. Thank you guys for coming back to our next interview. My name is Hannah.
Hello, my name is Jenna, and we have another music therapist with us today. This is Greg. Greg, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Greg. I have been a music therapist for just about 5 years now. And yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. So, Greg, can you tell us a little bit about how you found out about music therapy and decided to pursue that as a career path and those early stages of applying to college, that was like finding a school for you?
Yeah, unfortunately I don't have a beautiful story about how I found it. It's very kind of cliche to, I had this deep passion for music, and I think the first time I heard about it I was maybe 16. And I just was trying to figure out what are the different options that I can use music, and what are the different options that music can be a part of my life every day. And I heard about music therapy and kind of looked into it a little bit. And then I found the school that I really wanted to go to had a music therapy program. So seemed like a good fit at the time. But yeah, I had a very kind of cliche story. I think a lot of us kind of come to music therapy in that way.
I know Jenna knows you a little bit more than I do, but if you could talk a little bit about your college experience and where you went, what did you love about it? What did you wish was a little bit different, or what you would change if you did it again?
Yeah. So I did both my undergraduate and my graduate degree at SUNY Fredonia, which is about an hour west of Buffalo. And overall, I had a really positive experience. I thought, especially undergraduate, it was a nice balance of like, I felt like I could really develop my musicianship skills and really hone in on that. And then also just learn kind of the baseline, the bare bones about music therapy, and kind of learn what interested me the most. So I chose to do the recital track. So I took lessons for all 4 years, which isn't a requirement at Fredonia. But I chose to do that just because I was so interested in kind of the classical music piece of it and the formal musicianship part of it, really developing those skills and developing those performance skills. So that was the part that really interested me there. And I had some opportunity to take maybe a slightly different path in our coursework. We're required to take a developmental psychology class, and I chose to take psychology of women, which I thought was just really important. It's a profession in which, demographically, it's somewhat roughly 80 something percent female. And most of the places that we work are, typically high percentage female would be my coworkers, and even some of the clients that I work with. So I thought it was important to kind of develop that. And I appreciated that Fredonia had that class.
So when you went for your master's, did you go straight from undergrad back into your master's, or did you take some time in between?
I had a longer internship. I followed basically a full school year. So that took me almost a full year. And I did my internship in Buffalo. So one of the privileges I had there was that I could start some of my master's coursework while I was still an intern. So that's kind of what I chose to do. So some of like the weekend intensive classes and the classes that met maybe once a week, I would leave from my internship and then I would go to Fredonia for some coursework. So I didn't ever really get a break. I had like the summer after my internship, I wasn't taking any classes or anything, but even as an intern, I was still also a student and still working towards my master's. So I really was just kind of grinding through it.
When you started your internship, what was that experience like for you? Were you able to pick where you went, and did you do so intentionally in applying and deciding like where you wanted to go?
I somewhat resent our system for finding internships. I feel like it's somewhat cruel to like not guarantee placement in internships. So the thing that I was most interested in were university affiliated internships. I thought that that was like the best fit. I didn't love the system where we had to apply. So I luckily worked with my internship supervisor as a practicum student. So I basically just asked her if she was interested in taking another intern in the future. And she was kind of on the fence, I'll be honest, but she was gracious enough to accept me and to have me as her intern for the year. So I followed her and tracked her caseload which mostly went through schools and some group homes and things like that in the Buffalo region, mostly North Buffalo.
Where do you feel like you grew the most during your internship experience?
I kind of chose my internship to work on where I felt like I was weakest. I didn't feel like I naturally had a great rapport with working with children. And this internship was almost exclusively working with children. We did have a few adult clients, but almost all working with children. So I think that was an area I had to learn basically how to interact with kids. I was the youngest in my family, so I never really had to do that. And, all my friends, didn't really have any like baby siblings or anything like that. So I kind of needed to start from the ground up and develop those skills of how to interact with children. So I think that was the area that I grew the most.
In a lot of early years as a music therapist, as a student studying music therapy, we really get to be immersed in a lot of different theoretical orientations and learn about different styles of practice. So what were you really drawn to and what influenced you early on?
I think early on, I, along with a lot of my colleagues and friends and such, really aligned with humanistic philosophies. And I think that was at Fredonia, I think that was, we didn't really have a specific theoretical orientation, but it felt very humanistic the way that we were taught and some of how we were taught to look at things and to really considering of a lot of different options and to look at the whole person as you're looking at your therapy. That changed a little bit in graduate school. So in graduate school, we started taking classes on guided imagery and music and on vocal psychotherapy. And both of those classes and both of those areas in music therapy are much more focused on the psychodynamic. So it was interesting, even though I really felt like I aligned mostly with humanistic. It was really interesting to spend some time in the psychodynamic world and to try to understand that a little better. And we had to take a self-study course in graduate school as well. So I took neurologic music therapy, which is much more biomedical. So I did feel like I had a good experience in graduate school, that I really got a chance to explore a few different orientations. But I feel like undergrad was really pretty humanistic. That was, I think, the orientation that I'm most aligned with.
So as we've been talking to people too, we've kind of had a theme of people in their thought process of when they do graduate degrees, whether they decide to do it as a master's in music therapy or get a sort of supplemental degree in counseling or in social work or something of that nature. What kind of drew you to get a master's in music therapy versus another degree?
I think some of it is stubbornness. I think I felt as though I had invested a lot of my time, my thought, my energy into music therapy. And I love the profession. I really do. I recognize that it has its problems and its areas of weakness, but I do love the profession. And I didn't want to, not that it's giving up to get a supplemental degree, but I wanted to continue to invest in that. So instead of pivoting, I really felt like, okay, like, no, I want to do this. I really want to jump in. I want to try to get the best possible experience I can and to really immerse myself in this profession. And yeah, and that's what I chose to do. And yeah, so far, I think that decision has paid off. I'm happy with that decision.
So moving right along to the end of internship, we all have to take the CVMT exam. So what was that like preparing for that? Do you have any tips of how you prepared for the exam? What worked for you? What didn't work?
Yeah, the exam is it's rough. I felt like I had a decent experience in preparing for it and taking it. I did pass it on my first attempt, which I'm very fortunate. But the exam is always changing. I took it in 2018, I believe, and even now, 5 years later, it's very different. It's harder, I think, now than it was 5 years ago. And if you look at the exam 5 years before I took it, many people would have said it was probably easier then. So I think it continues to get more difficult. But what helped me the most was trying to have some confidence in myself. And I've always felt confident taking tests. So I think that helped. and to use the practice exams as much as you can. There's a lot of great books and literature, and if you're one that really absorbs a lot from reading and from doing that, I definitely recommend that. But I had a lot of conversations with friends who are going through the same thing, and we would talk about the way that the test was structured, and we would talk about the domains, and we would mention how like one word could change basically the domain that they're talking about, which would completely change the answer. So it really is, it's not so much about like how much do you know, it's like, you know, are you going to let them trick you into answering the wrong question? So I think those conversations were really helpful, and I would just take the practice exams flat, you know, give myself the time limit, and then I would just go through it, and all the correct answers, I would go through the answer key and why is this correct. And, you know, overall, I didn't drive myself too crazy with studying and preparing for it. But I took 2 different practice exams and spent a lot of time reviewing them. And like, I think a day or 2 before the test, I stopped studying. I think that was it. I was like, that's it, let it sit. We'll see what happens. You know, me cramming the last 2 days is not going to do much before the exam.
It seems like a lot of people have had similar experiences with the practice test being ultimately the most helpful in studying.
Yeah, I think the score that I got on my last practice exam is pretty much the exact score I got on the actual exam. So I felt like, you know, I knew I passed the practice exam, so I felt like I was ready. And yeah, luckily that translated. But yeah, I know some people, some of the newer practice exams don't exactly match up with how the new exam is structured. So, you know, I think there's maybe different methods that people have to consider, and yeah, it's difficult. I think now it's, you know, in total, your first time takers are somewhere over 70% pass rate, and then after that, it's, you know, something like 60%. You know, it's a tough exam. It really is.
Yeah. On a similar note, in New York, obviously, the process is a little bit different because we have the licensure process over there. So I would invite you to talk a little bit about that, since that's something that's relatively unique for right now in terms of getting the LCAT and having to go through all of that experience.
Yeah, so I actually currently live in New Jersey, so I don't have to do LCAT right now. But I lived and practiced in New York for about 4 years. It is a difficult process. It's a difficult and expensive process. I feel as though it's maybe slightly unfair. You know, I think the like grandfathering in process was like 10 years experience in the state or something like that. But then you have people who have 9 years experience in the state but don't have a master's degree, who are like, am I worse than the people with 1 more year experience? And, you know, you're already in the middle of your career, and it's a lot more difficult to go back and get a master's once you're in the middle of your career and in the middle of your life. So I think in some ways it's unfair. New Jersey has just passed a state licensure that is bachelor's level, which I think is a little bit more fair. But yeah, there's a lot of hurdles with the LCAT, and there's a lot of hurdles for something that isn't specific to music therapy. And I think it's better to have something instead of nothing. But there's a lot of flaws for us. I think it's a challenging, difficult process. And yeah, not everybody's going to have those same opportunities to do it. Not everybody's going to work at a place that's going to pay for supervision to get your LCAT. So there's a lot of ceilings, and there's a lot of things that prevent you from moving up. And then as you get into those higher level jobs, they might require it, but it's like you need privilege in order to get it. And I think that that's something that needs to be looked at in the future, is the amount of privilege you need in order to even get it. So, and luck, honestly, it's a difficult process. Yeah, I think there's some issues, but I'm glad there's something and not just nothing.
Can you speak a little bit about continuing education and what you have found the most beneficial in your time practicing within the profession? Is it going to conferences that you really enjoy? Is it taking classes again? Is it supervising? What do you find the pros and cons are of each, and what do you prefer?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of everything. I'm fortunate, I'm just at the end of my first cycle here. So grad school counted for most of my credits. So I kind of had those accounted for immediately, but I've done a good amount of supervision. I've had 3 different interns, and I've had some practicum students. And yeah, I've gone to some conferences and I've taken some trainings. I did the first level of the NICU training and I did NMT. In terms of what I think it's helpful to get all of those things if you're able. I think going to conferences is this moment, it's like a break and the monotony of every day. It gives you a chance to connect with other people, to get new ideas, to just learn about what other people are doing. And I think that's helpful. Sometimes you need to take a step out of your regular workday and you need to see what other people are doing. And interns, I think, and practicum students are so great to have. I think it's great to, in some ways give back to the profession, and in other ways it's nice to get that fresh perspective. It's nice to see it's nice to work with somebody that doesn't have the same like limiters that I might have. They have new ideas and they just need to try them and see if they're going to work. And sometimes I've had interns before that want to try an idea and I'm like, I don't think it's going to work, but then they do it and it works. And it's like, see, like that's something I never would have tried. I never would have thought to try. And I was skeptical that it would work. And then there it goes, it works. So I think it's nice to see that, and just to have somebody to be a soundboard. And I think sometimes talking about what you're doing helps you even further understand what you're doing yourself too. So I definitely recommend all of them. I think they're all rewarding in their own ways. I think that's really important for continuing ed, is to just try to get as many different things as you can.
I know that this wasn't, and this is not a question that we had prepared, but I'm curious about it now. As in terms of being a supervisor for interns, was it something that you had decided to do, or something that when you were like working for an organization at the time that was sort of like put onto you to do? And what was that learning process like, of like learning how to be a supervisor?
That's a great question. So I worked, my first job was kind of right next to the college that I went to. So it was in the town of Dunkirk, which is right next to Fredonia College. So I maintained really great relationships with those professors. And after having a few practicum students, I really spoke with those professors, and we decided that might be a good time to have an intern and to try that out. And I felt very supported. I felt like I had safety nets, because at the facility, our activities director was an MTBC, and she was a couple years older than me and had a little experience herself. And then I knew I was a 5-minute drive away from the college, and that our professors were available if I needed them, and if I had questions for them, that they would be happy to answer them. So I knew I had the resources, that even if there was something I couldn't provide, I knew where I could get those resources. So that was helpful, especially for for my first intern. So it kind of came from that relationship. It came from a good relationship with my college.
I know that you were my first practicum supervisor, which was really neat, and I learned a lot of great things under your supervision. Can you talk a little bit about your supervision style and what you try to bring into your supervision, and what you feel like you really offer as a supervisor?
That's a tough question. I try to create an environment that the work isn't scary. And it's difficult to do that sometimes, because everybody comes into a session with their own baggage and their own things that are happening in their life. But I try to create an environment that, like, just be proud of the work that you're doing and what you're giving to this person that you're working with. I also try to, and I think a lot of supervisors do this, to have like as many revelations come from within as possible. I don't want to tell you everything I can, or everything that I notice, but I really want a lot of it to come from within, and to make those connections yourself, because I think it's so much more powerful if you realize something on your own than if you have to just be told over and over and over again. It happens, sometimes you have a student that needs to be reminded a lot, and that's okay. But yeah, I really just tried to create an environment that was not traumatic, and hopefully it wasn't traumatic. But I know a lot of friends that have had traumatic experiences in their clinical, whether it's practicum or internship. And I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't that. I needed to make sure that it was an environment that my students felt supported in. And that, like, I don't know, just that it was a place to learn, a place to grow your skills, without like fear. I think it's tough to do that. It's such a vulnerable thing to be a music therapist and to lead a music therapy session. There's so many layers of vulnerability. So to take away some of that fear, I think is important.
Definitely. Kind of on the same vein in terms of jobs, what sort of is your advice and I guess your experience in terms of job searching, whether that's like your first job or as you've kind of transitioned throughout, and like what were you looking for specifically in terms of interviews, things like that?
So I've had 3 music therapy jobs. I worked at a nursing home, nursing and rehab home, and then I worked for a private practice, working mostly in schools, but we did home visits and group homes, and we had a clinic and everything like that. So we had a good mix there, but mostly working in schools. And then now I work in a children's hospital. What I would say is to listen to yourself. It's tough. There is like an element of like service where like your first job you ever get probably is not going to be the best music therapy job. And I'm fortunate the first job I had was actually a very wonderful experience. And I'm very fortunate that I had that experience. But there is like, it's a grind, you're not necessarily going to get your dream job right away. So there's an element of maybe settle a little bit early on and to understand that it'll come with experience and with time. And, when the opportunity is there, and then know when you need a change. I did love my first job, but there was basically a time that I realized I needed a change and I needed to completely change up my life. So that was why I decided to go back to working with kids. And then, yeah, same thing. I had a good experience at my next job, but I knew it was time to have another change and to try to do something that I felt like I was ready to have, more of a job that I was really in my plans and was in my dreams. And that was to work in a hospital setting. And, I had just been working with kids. So working in a children's hospital seemed like a great fit. So all of this stuff like didn't come until, about 5 years in the profession. And there's a lot of luck, a lot of privilege involved in being able to go to those different jobs. My first 2 jobs, I knew somebody that worked at each of those places. So that helps, And then this job, I didn't know anybody that worked here, but I had 4 years experience already under my belt. And I had a master's degree, and I had supervised interns, and I had done some other things. And, I really had developed a confidence in who I am as a therapist. So it takes time to get to that place, but yeah, hopefully that confidence grows, and hopefully with experience, you can get to the type of job that you've always wanted.
In terms of working as a music therapist, what can you share about your work as a music therapist? And have you worked, well, you've shared about a little bit about where you've worked, but what kind of stands out to you as you reflect on your experience and some things you've learned along the way?
Yeah, yeah, it's I feel like I could go place to place and talk about some really important moments, but working in the nursing home, what I found to be, and honestly, this is overarching for every job I've had, but quality of life, I think, whether it's a conscious goal or not, I think it's a goal for everybody in music therapy. I think quality of life is something we should always be thinking about. And that was very conscious for me working in the nursing home all the time, but there's a lot of overlap, like working in last year, one of the places I visited was essentially a nursing home for medically fragile children. And there's a lot of quality of life overlap. And that I think is something that I've really carried with me. And now working in a hospital, yeah, you see some difficult cases and some difficult situations, and I think quality of life is always there. The other piece that I think is always there is this idea of presumed competence. You presume that what's happening around you is purposeful, and like the responses that you're getting are purposeful. I think it's so important to meet your client where they're at. I think your job is really to help them experience their best moments. And I think I got a lot of that in my jobs. Is each one, it's really about, you see them at their best and you want them to be able to carry that outside of music therapy.
How do you, or what do you do to practice self-care for yourself? Because burnout is a very real thing. A lot of, especially young music therapists, can experience burnout. So how do you use your skills that you've learned to balance that when you're at work, being present at work, when you're home, taking time for yourself? And what do you do for your self-care?
I think one of the biggest things is learning how to compartmentalize and learning how to leave work at work. There are so many jobs that you really sometimes by necessity have to bring your work home with you. But I think it's important to set those boundaries up. I think it's so tough when you always feel like you're on call and like you are always thinking about the job. It doesn't leave space for yourself. You're only leaving space for your clients. So I think that is like one of the most important skills. And I remember the first couple of months I was working at the nursing home, I wasn't good at that yet. I used to think about the residents constantly at home. And I really had to learn how to shut that off. And, you know, sometimes it feels cold to say that, but it doesn't mean that I'm not empathetic in my work. It just means that I need to be empathetic to myself and I need to keep everything in its right place. The other thing is, for me, it's helpful to make music for myself. It's not for everybody. Sometimes you need a break from music, and sometimes I take a break from music at home. And find things that you love to do. I think it's helpful to do things like get some exercise and some sunshine when you can, to eat healthy when you can. I think all of those things are really, really important.
Kind of going forward instead of going back now, where do you envision the profession going in the future? Where do you think it's going to grow? Where do you hope that it grows? What would you like to see more of?
I think this is something I think about a lot. It's so tough because I feel like this series of dominoes that need to like start to fall in order for things to really happen. Because I think the dream that a lot of people talk about is master's level entry. But the reality of that, I don't think is there yet. I don't think wages are high enough to warrant master's level entry. I don't think most insurance companies don't pay for music therapy. I think when you start to get all of these different things, when you start to get better reimbursement for services and just better paying jobs, more jobs, and increased acceptance and awareness, I think that's when you can move towards master's level entry. But yeah, there's quite a few dominoes that need to fall. I hope in my lifetime that all of those dominoes fall, but yeah, if I could get any, it would be, I think, reimbursement. I think that would be so huge for music therapy, and for, honestly, for anybody that receives music therapy, just access to services would immediately go up when you're able to pay a music therapist a living wage to take a contract. You know, it's so tough because there's privilege even in our clients. There's privilege in, like, you know, that they have the money to pay for services out of pocket. And yeah, I think some of that needs to change. I think we need to be able to provide services for people that don't necessarily have that privilege.
I think that was all of our questions. Do you agree, Hannah? Yeah. Do you have anything else that you would like to add on, Greg, before we finish up?
I would just say my best piece of advice is make sure you love the profession if you want to go into it. It is challenging, and, like, being very real, it is a tough job a lot of the time. But I think if it's a good fit for you, for me, I don't think there's another job I would ever want to do. But I think you need to be aware, because sometimes you get this like kind of icky feeling in your gut, like, oh, this isn't it. And you need to listen to that when that shows up. So yeah, I think that would be my biggest piece of advice, is recognize that there's a grind, but if this is the job for you, then it's worth it. And if it's not the job for you, then it's not worth it.
Love ending on that advice.
Well, thank you, Greg, so much for joining us today. This was really great. We got a lot of information. Great to hear your perspective and get to chat with you a bit again.
Yes, it was so good to see you. Great to meet you, Hannah.
Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Maybe at another conference.
Nice.